What is going on, guys? My name is Kenji and welcome back to the channel. Hopefully it's not the first time you're watching one of my videos, but just in case it is, I'm now a final year medical student studying King's College London. And guys, I was looking through my YouTube channel the other day, looking at all the videos I made, and the last time I made a video about books was actually around 2 years ago, which is completely unacceptable. When I actually made that video, I was on roughly around 3,000 subscribers, which is quite a while ago. And since then, I've gained a number of subscribers, and what you guys probably don't know about me is that reading is absolutely one of my passions. The way that I actually read is through my Kindle. I also have Audible as well, and I read every single day, and it's one of my biggest passions ever. And because of that, what I really want to do is start a bit of a mini series taking you guys through all of the books that have completely changed my life in finances, personal growth, and all the different areas of my life. And in this video, I'll be taking you guys through all of the books that have changed my life in regards to personal growth and personal development, which is actually one of my favorite genres. So let's go ahead and jump into my favorite books, which are on personal growth and development. The first book that I'll be reading you guys is Happy by Darren Brown. This is one of my favorite books of all time. I actually remember when I first started reading this book, I was on holiday in Southeast Asia by myself in Bali, and I read this book like in a matter of 1 or 2 days, and there probably was no better sort of environment or kind of context to be reading this book. Highly recommend it for you guys. In this book, the former magician takes us through all of the key life lessons that he learned during his career as a magician and also in his life in general. He takes us through what it means to be happy, what happiness is, and how to actually achieve true happiness. This is actually one of the first times that I heard about the concept of stoicism and how we can control the way we see the world on the inside rather than relying on external circumstances to control how we see the world and our own happiness inside of us. One part of the book that I actually really like is how the author talks about how we deal with material possessions as human beings and how we can often try look for these external things, these external possessions in order to satisfy the life and the world inside of us. One quote that I actually really liked on this concept was, "The great possessions of the rich do not worry the poor. On the other hand, if the wealthy man's possessions fail, he's not consoled by the many things he already possesses. Wealth is like seawater. The more we drink, the thirstier we become, and the same is true of fame." If you're looking for quite a long book, but quite an easier read on how you can change your kind of perception of happiness and how to truly achieve it, then I highly recommend you guys check out this book. The next book that I want to recommend for you guys is The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I think that's how you say his name. If I could only choose one book to have in the whole entire world and only one book to kind of grow my personal growth and grow my emotional intelligence, it would honestly be this book. I can't stress that enough. According to the author and according to his philosophy, absolutely everything that someone does in their life is down to the agreements they make with themselves, with God, and with life itself as well. In these agreements, people actually tell themselves who they are, what is possible, what is impossible, and also what they can achieve in life. Some of these agreements we make to ourselves as human beings in our heads are actually quite helpful, but there actually is a majority of agreements that we make with ourselves that leads to unnecessary happiness, a loss of emotional energy, and also a loss of self-worth as well. So what I really like is that the author comes up with 4 really simple agreements that you can start by making with yourself that will leave you to have a happy, fulfilling, and hopefully pain-free life, free of suffering. And by making these 4 agreements, a person can actually have a huge impact on their life, how they see their life, and this is regardless of any sort of external circumstances. The author really does tell you that if you make these agreements internally, you will be free of a lot of these unnecessary worries and pains. And these 4 agreements are: firstly, be impeccable with your word. Secondly, don't make any assumptions. Thirdly, don't take anything personal. And lastly, always do your best. Now, I know these agreements sound so simplistic, so easy, but I can honestly tell you that the author goes into so much detail about firstly, what these actually mean, how they can apply to your own life, and finally, how you can apply to the bigger picture of life in order to achieve this kind of maximal happiness in your life without all of these attachments to external circumstances, and then ultimately relieve you of any sort of external or internal suffering that you might have. This book was so amazing that I very quickly went on to read the kind of next book straight after, which was The 5 Agreements. So I honestly cannot recommend this book enough. If there is one book that you take out of this whole entire video, please take this one. I promise you, you will not regret it. And that's the second book. Let's now move on to the third one. I love this author so much after reading this book that I then went on to read one of his successive books called The 5 Levels of Attachment, and my God, did it absolutely change my life. In this book, Don Miguel Ruiz again does a fantastic job at using analogies, and the analogy he uses throughout the whole entire book is this sort of football analogy that gives us a level of understanding on the attachments and the agreements we have in our minds with ourselves that are so unhealthy. Now, it is very different to the 4 agreements. There are some overlap in its concepts, but what this kind of focuses on is the attachments and beliefs that we've been given to us, you know, from our family, from our friends, from social media, from our culture. All of these kind of unhelpful attachments that have been given to us and that we truly believe, they can actually have a huge detrimental aspect on our character, on our spirit, and our emotional health. And it teaches you guys to understand the sort of attachments you have in your head, the subconscious ones that lie deep within your head, and how to slowly overcome them. And I actually wrote down the sort of football analogy he used, and I'll briefly explain to you guys to give you guys a bit of an idea what I mean. So the first level attachment right at the bottom is what you have called the authentic self. So using the analogy, the football analogy that he uses, the authentic self is basically you enjoying watching a football game for what it is. So the moment the referee blows the whistle, win or lose, you go on with your life. So if you're attending a football match and your favorite if you're attending a football match and your favorite team loses, you go home not really caring, you know, you move on your life, and it doesn't interfere with how you see the world and how you see life and this, you know, the sort of emotions you have on the inside. The second level of attachment that he describes that we have in our heads with certain concepts is preference. So that's what's called. The second one's preference. This is when you now root for one team. So you've invested an emotional side of yourself that enjoys the ups and downs of a great game, but you are able to let go. So maybe in the moment, you know, when your team loses, you might be a bit upset, but the second you leave the football stadium, you're not upset anymore, you carry on with your life and things move on. Now, the third level attachment is called identity. This is when you're a committed fan of one team and only one team. While you're able to enjoy a beer with an opposing fan, your attachment extends beyond the stadium gates. So maybe your team loses. Once you leave that stadium, maybe you go to the pub to have a pint, and someone, you know, from the opposite side of the table is an opposite fan, and they make a comment about how your team played badly. And this is the moment where you might maybe punch them, attack them, and the attachments you have with a certain belief kind of starts to take over you as a person. Now, the final and pretty dangerous level of attachment that he describes as some of us have with ourselves with certain concepts is called fanaticism. This is when you literally worship your team. An opposing fan is an absolute enemy. In your eyes, a true fan is willing to die and kill for his or her soccer heroes. And I guess, you know, what he sort of means by this sort of attachment, this unhealthy level of attachment, is what we may see with, for example, suicide terrorists. You know, these people sometimes, you know, from what we've seen on the news, are willing to die for a concept that they believe. They're also willing to kill other people for the things that they believe. And that's the sort of level of attachment that he describes that is very detrimental to a person's spirit, soul, and also mental state. And it's really important to actually realize, you know, kind of psychoanalyze yourself and think about everything you believe in. You know, maybe some of the concepts you believe in aren't actually yours, and they were given to you by your family or your culture, your religion. And it makes you think about, okay, this attachment I have, is it the truth or is it actually not true? And more importantly, what sort of level of attachment do I have with this, you know, with this sort of belief? Once you're actually able to identify what level of attachment you have with certain beliefs, then you can start slowly moving down the ranks and finally get to the last rank, which is the authentic self, and not be, you know, completely attached to a concept that may be detrimental to you as a human being. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that makes sense. It is obviously a bit deep, but I honestly promise you that if you read this book, your life will change and you will be able to question your thoughts and your beliefs and judgments a lot more than you normally do. The next book I want to recommend is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. You probably have heard of this book, and the reason why you probably have heard of it is because it's so amazing. If I'm to be completely honest with you guys, I used to be quite an anxious person, especially when I was going through my last biomedical science degree. I went through a lot of unnecessary stress, and what I can honestly tell you guys is that I'm not that person anymore. Yes, of course, you know, we all get anxious, we all get stressed, and there is a healthy level of stress, there is a healthy level of anxiety, but what I definitely had was not the healthy version that would push you to study, that would help you pass your exams. I had a huge amount of unnecessary, unhealthy anxiety and stress, and because of this book, as well as the other ones, but particularly this book in particular, as soon as I read this book, it really changed my whole outlook on life, how I perceive it, and also essentially how I experience anxiety and also stress. What I love about this book is that it's not just a normal kind of story being delivered to you. It's actually set as a person kind of asking this master questions, and the master slowly kind of responding to the person, and through that journey of listening to that conversation, you learn the key principles that will help you with your stress and anxiety. The author writes about how the individual, so you or me, should really try and stay present in the current moment without sometimes losing ourselves in the unnecessary stress and anxiety that comes from tomorrow. The author talks about how we as human beings can sometimes have this false illusion that we have so much control over our lives in the long run, whereas actually in reality there are very many aspects of our life that we can't control, and trying to control them only leads us to have an unnecessary amount of pain. After explaining all this, the book then goes into the different ways that you can kind of control and meditate to stay in the current present moment and relieve yourself of all of that. It describes this whole entire process of using these methods to stay in the present moment as a sort of thing that you have to practice every single day, and the more often you do it, the better you get at not worrying about the future and only focusing on the present moment at hand. I read this book probably over 2 years ago now, and there is not a week or a month that goes by where I don't flick through my highlights on Readwise and read all of the things that I highlighted and remind myself of these key principles of how important it is to stay in the present. So if you're the sort of person that has anxiety that is unhelpful, that gives you a bit more stress, and you want to find a way to kind of, get yourself rid of all of this, then I highly recommend you guys check this book out. You will not forget, and you will come back and thank me in the comments down below once you've read this book. I promise you guys that. So that was the fourth book. Now let's move on to the final book that I had to recommend for you guys. Last but not least is Emotional Intelligence and Why It Can Matter More Than IQ by Daniel Goleman. This was honestly probably the first book that ever changed my life when it came to personal development. To tell you guys a bit of a quick story, the way that I actually first kind of picked up this book was during a period of my life where I was going through something quite difficult. I remember going through like a very difficult moment, and then I went on a sort of 1 week vacation in the beach in Kenya, and I was sat on the beach and having a really difficult time. And I remember, a few days ago, my uncle mentioned this word. He mentioned this word called emotional intelligence. And I went on my holiday, went to the beach, and while I was struggling through this sort of, this thing in my life, I remember those words. I remember the word emotional intelligence. So what I did is I picked up my phone very quickly and I typed in emotional intelligence, and I started doing a bit of research about it, going very deep into kind of the literature of what it is. And on Wikipedia, I found that this kind of word, this phrase, was coined by a man called Daniel Goleman, who is a psychologist that wrote this book about emotional intelligence and how it has a huge impact on your life. So let's quickly define what emotional intelligence is if you haven't heard it before. Emotional intelligence apparently explains the importance of emotions in your life, how they help you or hurt your ability to navigate the world, followed by practical advice on how to improve your own emotional intelligence and why that is the key to leading a successful life. And he honestly stresses the point about how your emotional intelligence matters just as much, if not more, than your normal IQ intelligence. And I highly agree with this point. I think the reason why I've got to where I am in my life in regards to getting to medical school and doing well in my exams and stuff like that is not because of my normal IQ, not because of my normal level of intelligence. It has so much to do with my emotional intelligence and how I was able to actually go through adversity, work through failure, and then finally not let all of that kind of put me down, to continue to believe in myself and then finally become the person I am today. Through his book, he really explains how you kind of have two separate minds in your head. You have the emotional mind, which developed earlier in the kind of development of human beings. You have the emotional mind first that receives information, but then passes that information on to your rational mind. And it's this kind of discrepancy between the two minds that we have that really governs how we see the world and how we respond to things in the outside world as well. To quickly finish off, he kind of describes 3 main lessons in this book. The first lesson is that emotional intelligence depends on your ability to be self-aware, so to understand the things that are going on in your heart, the feelings that you have, and lastly, your ability to self-regulate, so your ability to kind of regulate the emotions you have, understand why you have them, and then think about whether or not they're an appropriate response to what is going on in your life. The second lesson they have is that if you have a high emotional quotient, so high level of emotional intelligence, you're more likely to be successful and healthy. And again, that's kind of the point that I said before, how I truly believe that's, how my level of emotional intelligence that I've developed through reading these books has really allowed me to reach this point in my life where I am now. The final lesson they kind of describe is lesson 3, which says that you can actually boost your own emotional intelligence by mirroring other people's body language and thinking optimistically. So it really talks about how, one way we can learn to improve our emotional intelligence is by understanding ourselves. But lastly, something that is really important in emotional intelligence is also how we understand other people's feelings, how we understand, what is going on in other people's lives, and to truly be empathetic. And it's your ability to develop these skills and to kind of reflect what's going on in another person's mind and body that will then allow you to have another level of emotional intelligence. And that is the final book that I want to recommend to you guys. Honestly, all 5 of these books have absolutely changed my life in so many different ways, and I want to leave you guys with a few more extras to also help you. So the first one is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***. This kind of second book after that was Everything is F***, which I really liked by the same author. Thirdly, Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty. And finally, and really most importantly, What They Forget to Teach You in School, and all of the books associated with the School of Life. The School of Life is a free online resource that if you don't want to pay money, you can go online right now, read all of their articles that they have on developing your own personal growth. I highly recommend it. It's all free, and I literally have read every single article they have on there, and I really do recommend it so many times. The last thing I want to say is if you want to actually check out any of these books, you can read it absolutely for free with a link down below in the description I have for you guys on Audible. Audible is one of the main ways that I listen to books when I'm on my car journey, on the bus. That as well as my Kindle is what I use so often. So if you want a free book to listen to any one of these books, then click the link down below in the description. It's not sponsored. It's just an affiliate link that I have that I really want to recommend for you guys. So go check it out and let me know what you guys think about this book. The last thing I want to say is that I love so much to get recommendations from people. So if you have any sort of book recommendation that you want to recommend to me or other people who watch this video that is to do with personal growth and development, then please link it down below so I can go check it out and we can help everyone else out as well. Oh, and the last thing before I go as well, if you want more book recommendations, all of the books I sort of read, I always put it on my weekly newsletter. So if you want to sign up to my weekly newsletter as well and keep up to date with all the books that I talk about, then you can sign up to that completely for free by clicking the link down below as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, then you might want to check out one of the last videos I made over here, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care.